A rock house, or a rock shelter, sometimes known as a crepuscular cave, is a pretty common sort of natural formation that you find here in the mountains of eastern Kentucky. And what it consists of is an area that stays dry underneath an overhanging ledge of stone. Typically these are made out of sandstone, and they were carved by water ages and ages ago as it came through here. And in this case, that water is the river, which is still down at the bottom of this valley. So typically when you find them, you find a dry place to sleep, you find sandy soil that produces mast-bearing trees like acorns and hickory trees, and when you find those things, you typically find deer and other animals that come to eat them. So people have been camping in and hunting out of these types of rock shelters for as long as there have been people in this part of the world, which, as far as we know, in eastern Kentucky is about 12,000 years. And in this very moment, if we look at the floor here, we can see deer tracks where a good-sized deer has passed just outside the drip line of this overhang. This particular rock shelter has been deepened and smoothed beyond what had originally been eroded by the water. And sometimes this can happen by a process called frost spalling, where water freezes in the cracks in the rock, and then as it expands, it breaks pieces off. It can also be done by fire, by lighting a fire in the cave, and that is something that may have happened in this particular location. It's hard to say, but you can see that the ceiling has this unique texture here up until a certain point, and then it becomes very smooth. And if you dig in the dirt here at the base of it, there are a lot of there's a lot of ash, carbonized charcoal in with the sand. So at a minimum, there has been a lot of fire in here, and that may have been used at some point to enlarge the space and get sleeping area to be further back from where the rainfall is. In ancient times, people would live in these rock shelters during hunting season and then live in villages along the river during the growing season. And now, in modern times, people still camp in rock shelters to hunt and still live near the river and build towns near the river and do a lot of farming during the growing season. The cliff fortress consists of a series of rock shelters along the base of a cliff. This area I think of as the kitchen because it contains a fire pit that showed signs of cooking in modern times as well as in the more distant past. It's the largest of the rock shelters and has the space to accommodate a variety of different activities. Like much of the cliff fortress, it has a really nice view of the river below, but is not easily approachable from that direction. Nearby is this area, which is a little bit smaller but more sheltered from the wind and the rain. This shelter, with its slabs of rock at counter height, seems like it would make a good workroom for weaving and sewing. This promontory offers a commanding view of the valley below and the stars above. It also acts as a roof over this naturally occurring root bench beside this waterfall, which is a trickle at the driest of times and a torrent after a rain. I've always wanted to have a rock house that I could fix up using the skills that I learned growing up here in eastern Kentucky. So I'm gonna take this one and see what I can make of it. The first people that came to this part of the world are mostly a mystery. We know a little bit about them from some of the stone tools that they left behind, and not much else. People figure that they traveled in small groups and were sort of nomadic hunter-gatherers, but that's largely just a guess. Later on, different people came, or maybe the descendants of the same people came here and farmed in the valleys and hunted out of these rock shelters and built mounds along the river, which are a lasting monument to them. And there's one not very far from here that can be seen from the top of the cliff fortress on a clear day. And those people are sometimes called the Adena people or the Hopewell people. These are not names that they called themselves, and these are not tribal names. They're names that later people have given to groups of people who had the same stuff, the same types of artifacts, the same types of pottery, for instance, or the same shapes of stone tools. Going back to the earliest written records, this area was frequented by the Cherokee and Shawnee people, and a little bit later on, the Haudenosaunee people staked a claim to it and sort of said they didn't want anyone else living here, and they had the power to back that up. So most of the settlements in Kentucky moved north of the Ohio River. There were some exceptions like Iskipakathiki, which is also known as Kentucky in some of the Haudenosaunee languages, and that's in what is now Clark County. But for the most part, these areas were really sparsely populated when people from Virginia started coming here. And the people coming from Virginia, they were mostly coming from Virginia. They were largely of English ancestry, and they brought with them enslaved people who were generally of African ancestry, and to some extent they intermarried with the native people who were still in this area. Here in Owsley County, there were people identifying as native as late as the 1870 census that I've been able to find, and there is a native cemetery that is not from ancient times but from the 1800s, just a couple of miles from here. While all of those people were from different groups of ancestry and spoke different languages and probably had a lot of different beliefs, there's also a common thread that runs through all of them, which is the material culture that comes directly from the land itself. They were all mountain people. If you grew up here in the mountains, there's a fair chance that you grew up fishing and hunting and picking berries and gathering other foods from the woods and maybe growing plants as well. And that's what people have been doing here for all these centuries. And similarly, some of the same materials that people use, the buckskins and leather and furs and pottery from the clay and basketry from the various plant materials that are around here, are all similar because people are gathering them from the land. So the land, to some extent, makes the culture. So what I'm doing here is taking a few small aspects of that material culture that have been with us in these parts since very remote antiquity, and putting them together to form a cohesive set of stuff for my place here. So much of the time when people talk about Appalachian culture, they're talking about things that are entertaining, like storytelling and music, and that's great and that's part of life. But culture is bigger than that. Culture is the way that a group of people collectively solves their problems. Where are they going to live? How are they going to live? What are they going to eat? And on and on. So culture is a really big topic, and I'm going to touch on just a few aspects of Appalachian culture in the course of this video. So this is my kitchen. I really love the view and the open floor plan, but I could use some more counter space. I'd like to improve the fire pit some. Put in a clean food processing counter here and some storage up on this shelf. I'd like to have some additional food storage in this area, which stays cool all the time, and set up this covered bench area as a place for cracking and processing acorns and for washing utensils. Of course, the most important necessity for any kitchen in any age of the world is food. And fortunately, there's a whole lot of food in the woods of eastern Kentucky. Now, as I mentioned before, a lot of people probably came here to hunt out of these rock shelters. And when they started doing that, there were some animals like caribou that aren't around here anymore. And there were also some animals like glyptodonts and woolly mammoths that aren't around anywhere anymore. But for the last few thousand years, the environment here has been pretty similar to what it is now, and we have hunted and gathered a lot of the same foods that people still hunt and gather today. When I first got this piece of property, I hunted a deer on it, and so I've been using the skin for some of the things that I'm making for the Cliff Fortress, and also the bones. Apart from deer, there's also the fish and the mussels in the river, and lots of edible foods, including nuts, berries, tubers, and many types of edible greens. So here are just a few of our traditional Eastern Kentucky wild foods that can be found within easy walking distance of the Cliff Fortress. This plant is called Jack in the Pulpit, or sometimes Indian turnip, and it has a corm, an underground root vegetable part that can be dug up and eaten, but you have to let it dry for about 6 months. Otherwise it will sting the insides of your mouth. But when it is dried, it can be ground up and used as flour.
These are service berries, which ripen at the beginning of June. These are black raspberries, which ripen in the middle of June. This is hopness, also known as ground nut. And these are its edible tubers, which can be stored in sand and will keep for about a year. Blackberries, of course, are a long-standing favorite and probably have been for nearly as long as there have been people in this part of the world.
Stinging nettles like these grow all along the river, and they have often been a nourishing source of food for people when not much else was available. They're covered in these tiny little hairs that sting when you touch them, so they do make you work for it, but they can be harvested multiple times a year from the same spot.
These wild black cherries ripen in late July or early August, and the frost grapes, which are with them, will ripen after the frost. Elderberries like these grow in abundance along the riverbank and ripen in early August. Around the same time, nuts like these hickory nuts begin to get ripe. At around the same time, mushrooms like these chicken of the woods can be harvested, and these American Caesar mushrooms. Cucumber root can be harvested in late August. At around the same time as the nut harvest is finishing up, pawpaws become ready. These are our largest native fruit. After the pawpaws, persimmons get ripe. Both pawpaws and persimmons can be squished into a pulp and dried in strips.
Part of the reason wild foods are so abundant here is because of the environment and the long growing season. But another part is the fact that hundreds of generations of people who have lived here have helped to cultivate and create conditions conducive for those food-bearing plants to grow.
With the cold weather comes deer season, and the best time for harvesting river mussels from the river. These have been a traditional source of food and are abundantly supplied in this part of the river. Their shells have also been used for ornamental purposes and for the making of tools. And fish can be caught from the river all year long, even in the wintertime.
When I first was exploring the cliff fortress, in this overhang I found a bunch of dried leaves that had been stored under a rock, probably by an animal, that were from agave virginica, which is a local agave species that has been used for a long time to make plant cordage out of, strings and ropes and things of that nature. And like other members of the agave family, it has long fibers that can be spun into cordage. And that's what inspired me to make this into a fiber arts or textile working room, which is something you would find in a lot of family compounds and houses in pre-industrial times. So this would be a place for spinning, weaving, and sewing using cordage as well as skins. Similarly with the sleeping quarters, it's a nice space, it has a lovely view of the forest and the river, but inside it's pretty plain. I'd like to have some skins for bedding, maybe some storage on the shelf over here, and some decorations on the wall.
This is a stone tool that was found in one of the rock shelters. And this is the skin of a deer. So I'm going to work on scraping the excess bits of flesh off of the inside of the deer hide in preparation for tanning it. The tool is probably centuries old at a minimum, possibly many centuries old, and it's still sharp. It doesn't cut like steel would, so it's safer for the hide and less likely to damage the hide. After fleshing the hide, it's soaked in a mixture of wood ashes and water, which allows the hair to be removed easily. Next, it's soaked in an oak bark solution, which changes it from rawhide into leather. After that, it's rinsed off and stretched. And then it will be allowed to dry.
So after it has been soaked in the tanning solution and then allowed to dry in the sun, the hide is now leather, but it is very, very tough. And so the next thing is to work the hide to make it more supple and more usable for a wider variety of things. And one of the things that I like to do in this situation is to trim off the very edges of the hide. So this is the very margins of it are kind of irregular shaped and they dry and shrink a lot, so they get pretty tough. So I'm going to trim these off using a piece of broken shell and make cordage, which can be used for a variety of different things out of the trimmed off parts. So this lashing, which has been trimmed off from the edges, this is going to be stretched, well wetted, then stretched out and twisted and braided into a very durable form of cordage. And then the rest of the hide is going to be rubbed down with tallow that was rendered from the animal and then just sort of worked back and forth until it becomes much more supple and flexible, more like the leather that you're used to. So this is the tallow. This is just fat that's been melted and allowed to reharden. And I'm going to work this in on the inner side of the hide rather than the outer side. In other words, the flesh side rather than the hair side. And
Going to work it in all over this hide and then bend the hide back and forth until it becomes more supple. And this is a long process that takes a lot of doing. And I think in former times, people probably would have done this together in groups and spent a lot of time together while they were doing this. Then, once the hide is thoroughly slathered in oil, I'm going to take it and fold it over and start working it back and forth, bending it and creasing it. Now, as I'm doing this, you may notice that the color will actually change to a lighter color in places where it's bent. And as that's going on, it's taking on the texture that it will eventually have of much softer leather. And here is what a piece looks like after much working. It's soft and flexible, it doesn't crackle when it bends, and it's ready for a variety of household uses. Vegetable tanned deer hide is still on the stiffer side when it comes to use for garments. It works well for outerwear or shoes, but it's not as soft as brain tanned leather, which has a more fabric-like consistency. This thin, soft form of deer skin is called buckskin. It's made by bucking the hide, soaking it in lye, and then stretching it out, smoking it to preserve it, and then working it with brain or other emulsified fats until it becomes soft. And this is a bone tool. This is an awl made from the cannon bone of a deer, one of the bones in its leg. And this is based on an artifact that a classmate of mine found in Lee County. I made this one. It has a hole that's naturally occurring in the bone right here. And what I do with it is I take some sinew cordage here, which needs to be wetted to be worked with, and thread that through this hole, and then use the tip to poke it through a piece of buckskin to sew it up. And here's an example of a seam that I have sewn with it, just to make a little bag that's inside out so you can see the seam. I'm going to take it and turn it right side out for you. There's another video on my YouTube channel where I show the whole process of making this item. And it's a little bag with a button made from a walnut shell that has been sanded down. It has this naturally occurring septum in it, which makes a nice button if you just take the time to rub it back and forth over a rough piece of stone for long enough. Right here along the edge of the riverbank, but in the riverbed, there's a layer of clay, and I'm gonna scoop some of this up. You can see it's kind of got multiple different colors, red and sort of a greenish color in it. And I am going to strain the rocks out of this and then use it to make something out of. Humans are not the first or only creatures to make things out of clay. Insects and birds, for instance, make nests out of clay. But our use of fire is pretty unique, and at some point in the distant past, someone, possibly by accident, found out that if you put something made out of clay in a fire, and if you're very lucky and it doesn't shatter, then you can end up with a stone-like substance. And thus the world of ceramics was born. My plan is to take the clay that I've harvested and make some ceramic items for the cliff fortress
including some for the kitchen, something for the sleeping area, and something for the fiber arts working area.
The history of clay making in Kentucky goes back 3,000 years or so. The woodland tribes of that time, the ancestors of today's Haudenosaunee and Cherokee and Shawnee peoples, made pieces a lot like this one from clay straight out of this very same river. The clay body has a lot of sand in it and is a little bit difficult to work with, but once it's fired, it's very tough and can even be used for cooking in if it's used carefully. After the ceramic pieces have been dried for weeks, it's possible to fire them. The first step is to build a fire and then let it burn down to hot coals. The next step is to cover the hot coals with a layer of dry but partially decomposed leaves, and then quickly stack the pieces of pottery on top of this, and then cover them with another layer of charcoal, which is just partially burnt wood, and then add wood over top of that to continue the firing process. If the pottery heats up or cools down too quickly or unevenly, it will shatter. The leaf litter and the charcoal help to ensure that the pottery heats up slowly and evenly to a high enough temperature that the silicon it contains vitrifies, turning it into a hard stone-like substance. Appalachian pottery today contains influences from European and African ceramic traditions, but in many ways it's still very similar to what it was hundreds of generations ago, especially when it's pit fired like this is. The fire burns all night long, and then in the morning, after things have cooled some, it's possible to take the pieces out and see what survived the fire and possibly what did not. This small vessel will be for holding salt to help keep it dry. And this little black disc is going to be part of an ancient tool, which I'll demonstrate soon. So here is a jar that's been fired in the firing pit, and then it's been sealed with deer tallow on the outside to keep moisture from the outside from seeping through the pottery. And then it's had a piece of buckskin wetted, stretched over the surface, and tied on with a piece of cordage, and that will hold it nice and tight. And it's not completely airtight, but it is good enough to keep insects out and keep dampness out. And food that's properly stored in one of these containers can last a very long time. So here is a simple oil lamp that I've made, and this is to provide some light and a little bit of warmth for the sleeping area. And we've got pit fired pottery here, and then deer tallow with a sliver of cedar wood to serve as the wick. And so this will provide about the same amount of light as the flashlight from an iPhone would, a little bit more than that. And this is a very typical type of lamp that would have been used from the Neolithic up until fairly recent times. This little gear right here is something that I made in the recent pit firing, and it's essentially a bead. You could put it on a string and wear it around your neck if you wanted to. But what if you didn't have a string? In fact, this little device is one of the most revolutionary things that humans have ever come up with. So much so that the very word revolution probably wouldn't exist without this device right here. What this is a spindle whorl. You put a stick through it, and then
you spin it around to twist fiber. This is the ancestor not only of the spinning wheel, but also of the cartwheel and essentially all other rotary technologies and mechanisms. So human culture changes a lot once this is invented. So here I have the spindle and I have some nettle, and I'm twisting the nettle onto the spindle. And this nettle is peeled off of the outside of the stems and then mashed up and soaked in water just to soften it up a little bit. And then it can be twisted into cordage. And this cordage can be any length. You can just go on and on with it forever, basically. And if you want to double it or triple it, you can make it any thickness that you want. So you can make anything from a small line all the way up to a big rope. Getting a very, very thin thread is very difficult, but it can be done, especially with practice. Nettle can make a pretty fine thread. There are some other types of threads that are coarser, like agave. And then as it gets, the more twisted it gets, the more, once you get started, you can spin the spindle around and it helps speed up the twisting process. And you can even drop the spindle and let it twist at the end of the thread, especially once the fiber that you're spinning is combed out a little better than what this is. But that is the essence of how you would make string using this ceramic piece.
These are some woodland period pottery shards that I found in the cliff fortress.
This is a hoof, and inside of it is a bone called the coffin bone. And this is that same bone with the hoof and the organic material around it removed. This vine is moonseed, and this stem that is growing on is arundinaria or river cane.
Here's a very simple bow with an arrow made out of a piece of river cane with a tip made from the coffin bone of the deer, and a tube for holding some arrow poison made from the seeds of the moonseed plant. Note, though, that in modern times, arrow poison is not legal for use in Kentucky. This is a stone knife made out of Kentucky chert. It's held in place partly by the tight fit with the antler that it's being fit into, and then partly with this pitch from a pine tree. The pitch will harden when it's heated and act as an adhesive, and it will also help to hold on some leather lashing, which is going to further serve to hold the knife blade in place. This is a piece of the hide that was trimmed off and has been softened up by soaking in water, but is going to be very hard once it dries. This type of knife is a one-handed draw knife designed for peeling bark or splitting wood by drawing it towards yourself.
This is a hook made from the cannon bone of a deer, and this is a piece of sinew that I've tied a loop in. And I'm going to use this to wrap this hook, and this is going to serve to be able to attach the hook to a line, and also it's going to help to disguise the hook and make it look a bit like a nice juicy worm. And this kind of hook has been used to catch fish as well as snapping turtles. And most of them, if it were to break off in their mouth, they would be able to digest it. Snapping turtles and most fish can digest pieces of bone if they need to. So it's a lot less slender than a modern wire fish hook, but it's effective or potentially effective, and readily makeable from the right type of deer bones. And the sinew is also made out of protein. It's from the deer's back, and it will expand some when it's in water and look a little bit more like a beetle grub, like a segmented worm-like creature that the fish might be looking for and interested in eating. This end would be attached to a piece of line, which then can be attached to a pole made out of river cane. And cane poles are still something that people sometimes use as fishing. They were very popular when I was younger. Of course, there are much nicer poles out there that are available now, but they are something that can be made easily from stuff that just grows right by the water. So that is essentially the finished product, other than that I will trim off of these trailing ends here. And it has this loop for attaching it to a line here. And then this is made from along similar purposes. This is a scaling and gutting tool. It's sharp along this edge and has a wrapped piece to hold there. Here is the fish hook attached to a piece of cordage made from linden bast, which is the inner bark of a linden tree, and then that is attached to a piece of river cane to act as a pole. Traditionally, a pole like this might be used for fishing, or the line might be attached to a limb that lets it to drip into the water, or a series of them could be attached to a longer line that are dangled over a water course. This is a gig. It is a spear for hunting bullfrogs, and it is very sharp, made out of a very thin piece of bone attached to 7 or so feet of river cane. Here are some very basic toiletries that are to be used in conjunction with the waterfall. This is just a small piece of buckskin that has been roughed up to be used as a towel. So you can actually scrape buckskin and it raises up a fuzziness on it and then that makes it very absorbent. And this is a soap gourd filled with lye soap. Lye soap is a local specialty product here in eastern Kentucky. This particular lye soap was made out of hickory ashes and deer tallow. And then have a comb, not the prettiest comb ever, but functional, whittled out of a piece of cedar. And then this horn is for rinsing off with. If you are using a waterfall for a shower, you can use it to get wet, but you do not want to rinse soap off into the water course. No matter how natural or good the soap is, the salamanders don't want to breathe it in, so it doesn't belong in the streams. You want to go fill up something like this with water and go a distance away from the stream and then rinse off. Here's a little container of sort of liniment. It's kind of an all-purpose body care product, basically. And this is made out of poplar buds and tallow. And this is called Balm of Gilead, which is a name that comes from the Bible, but the plants that are in it are not the ones that would have been used in that part of the world or that time. So just a reddish salve made with poplar buds and some other ingredients cooked in the tallow. And this can be used for moisturizing, and it can be used for relieving sore muscles and helping with circulation. Here's a little gallery of skulls. So I feel like no fortress would be complete without a bunch of skulls. Got raccoon, coyote, deer, probably a goat. Strange thing to find in the woods here. This one's from a skunk. Next one is a raccoon, and then finally a possum. All of these are creatures that live around here and that share the forest with us. So here is what I've done to outfit the sewing and fiber arts area. I've got some cordage made out of a type of grass called big blue stem. I've got the nettle cordage. I've got just a sample of this cordage, which is made from the bark of the linden tree. And then I've got the sinew and the sewing awl, which we saw before. And then this is a little tube made from river cane, and inside it got a bone needle and a wooden needle or awl. Also got these two bone awls. This one is for poking a wide rectangular hole in something to lace a strap through a piece of leather or buckskin, as the case may be. And this is for poking two holes at once, and you can use it to space out the holes. So if you put one prong in one of the holes made from the last time and keep poking that way, you will get an evenly spaced seam, which can be difficult to do. And then this is a very simple type of loom. This is made from a scapula with alternating holes and slots in it, and the threads going one way are threaded through there, and the threads going the other way are shuttled in between them using this piece of a rib that has a hole drilled through it. And so this is a simple way of weaving a strap, a thin piece of cloth, and if need be, these can be made together into larger ones, attached together into larger pieces of the same type of cloth. And then over here I have a stack of different kinds of buckskin and bark tanned and acorn tanned deer leather. So, a crafting room like this would have been found in just about any home in pre-industrial times and would be an important source of materials like garments like the ones that I'm wearing. Oh, also, I have a little bowl of buttons. Got some antler buttons, some wooden buttons. These are made out of sycamore wood, which does a reasonable job of not splitting. And then I've got some pieces of walnut shell that are being worked into being buttons, and some ceramic buttons also, some ceramic buttons made of clay. This little area off to the side of the kitchen is sheltered and has a large slab stone in here, which I thought would be a great place for cracking nuts and acorns and maybe marrow bones, and a little shelf off to the side of it where some water could be kept for washing. This stone came out of the river. It's a gritty stone that's made out of a different type of sand, or it's actually made out of larger grains of quartz than what the sandstone here is made out of. So it's not something that's been used as an artifact before, but it's going to be one now. It's very fit for the purpose for a found object. The squirrels had been cracking nuts here before I got here, so I was really just following their example. So here's the fire pit and the antler for raking the fire. Here is a basket with some utensils. Got the shell knife for cleaning fish, the corn scraper made from a deer jaw, some baskets, a walnut bowl, a cup and straw made out of a gourd and a piece of river cane, and lots of fired pottery. And here we have a basic Neolithic bedroom with a nice pack basket, a leather hide for sleeping on or sitting on, a flat surface to lay things on, and last but not least, a little light to see by when it's dark. Thanks for coming along on this Rockhouse remodel.